Hi, I'm Helen Van Wyk. Welcome to my studio. Why is painting apples my favorite lesson? Well, I studied with Maximillian Roscoe, and he said, Helen, you want to be a portrait painter? I said, yes. He says, go out and buy a bag of apples. Well, I went out and I bought a bag of apples, and he took from the bag one apple and put it on a model stand, and he says, all right, paint that apple. Well, I had great respect for him, and I did anything he told me to do, and so he left the studio, and I had a canvas, and I painted an apple. He came back in about an hour, and he didn't look at what I was doing. He went over to the model stand, took the apple off the model stand, threw it back with all the apples I had painted. He says, now I shall look at your picture. He said, from your picture, I should be able to tell which apple over there was your model. Well, if I can paint a really good apple, I could then bring that or take that painting expertise to all the other subject matters, because an apple has a shape, an apple has a texture, an apple has a shine, an apple has color, an apple has tone, and also an apple would like to be in a nice situation. So let me start this picture and talk about the principles of painting as I go. One of the principles that's very important in making a decent looking picture is the placement of the overall composition. And so I'm going to put an apple over here. I'm going to put an apple down here and one here. I never let them, if I'm going to do one subject such as those 5 apples, I would never evenly place them in relation to the edges of the canvas. So this one's going to get close to the edge, this one's going to get in further. This one's going to be here, and I'll make this one further down. And so this is what I call an envelope that decides how much of this canvas I'm going to take up. Wouldn't it be terrible if I just started with one apple, great big, and I'd start out and try to do all the rest in relation to it? Well, I'd just make one this big, and then put another one in. I say, oh, what the heck, I don't want to put all 5 in anyway. No, so this is the composition. So now I'll put a little bit of a mark to indicate each one. It's not really, at this point, the way they really are. It's just an indication of where they're going to be. Not ever letting any of them touch. Now, I know they look like that. I might adjust them. I'm going to move this one by itself. Have this one next to this one. Then this one also by itself, touching this one, and see how that looks. It's not bad. Now, that's just organizing them. Now I have to think of their anatomy. Well, this apple has its little stem coming out that way, and this one is the blossom end, and it's going to come up almost straight. I wouldn't want that blossom end to be right in line with that, because it would be confusing. So I'll move this one over just a little bit, so this has a place of its own. This one's going to be moving out this way. Wouldn't it be awful to have them all sticking up all the same? It would be monotonous, and we try not to have monotony in our pictures. And then this one is going to face up that way. And this one's going to come forward. That's where the stem is. So if I recognize how important the anatomy of each apple is, I can then train my eye to recognize the anatomy of other subjects. And these are the cast shadows that are going to be down here. And that cast shadow is going to kind of make this enjoy the fact that this is going to be 3 and this is going to be 2, because we don't like to have 2, 2, and 1. There's a golden rule of proportion that I'd like to talk to you sometime, but not today. I'd like to zero in more on these apples. Yes, they're my subject, and now I have to think about how I'm going to do them. They're red and green, and I think that the red color is a bleeding color. No pun intended. So maybe it would be better to put the green of the apples in before I put the red. And if I observe the apple from the top down, maybe I'll have my eye very impressed by every little bit of it, every little nuance of it. I hope you can see my brush strokes. Trying to have the brush strokes represent each observation. I don't look in paint, I look and analyze in paint. What I'm analyzing now is not only the green part, but the fact that that is the top plane of the apple. Now, my strokes will change because I'm going to be coming down on the front plane of the apple. This color, this is Grumbacher red, bright, bright red, and that red I can move that color right into the green. That's where the light strikes the apple. Well, the shadow is the color that causes a lot of problems. Before a color goes into shadow, the color gets darker. And I've just darkened the red with alizarin crimson. And now the red color goes completely into shadow, and we analyze nature to find the color to make the shadow. And I've added green. Why green? Light is made of 3 colors, red, yellow, and blue. I'm using red. I have to use yellow and blue. I mix them together, get green, and that's called the complementary color to red. This complementary color grays the red, grays it enough that the red has the illusion of falling into shadow. Let's see how that painting of the apple appears against its background. Now I have to fix the edge. Because a painter has to be an edge maker. Has to move the paint against other paint. And be in control of the shape. Okay, 1 down and 4 to go. Let's see how that looks from a distance. I put some background in as a prerequisite for doing this apple over here. This one seems to have red back in here. How nice it is to cut that red against the pre-painted background and be in control of the outline. Clean my brush thoroughly right now before I put the green that I see in here, and the stroke went from the clean part of the canvas up into the wet red. There's a little shadow here because this is a little cone, inverted cone there. And now we have red again. Bright red, Grumbacher red and white. Ooh, really makes that jump out. Darken it just before the shadow, and then green into it, sap green, to make the shadow. Now I'm on to this apple. And I should make sure that I have a contrast of tone between here and here. I don't see a contrasted tone between this apple and this apple. I'm going to make one because, after all, these apples are going to go into a pie. Certainly not soup. But the picture's going to live on, so I really have to think more about how this is than that is. There's a flaw on that apple also. I call that a Gertrude, if I paint it. Gertrude came in one time with a beautiful painting, but the pear looked funny, and I said, Gertrude, that's a funny-looking pear. She says, Helen, it was a funny-looking pear. I said, it has a funny lump on it. She says, it had a funny lump on it. I said, you had that wonderful opportunity to immortalize all peardom, and you had to put that funny lump on it. And so whenever something is there, just because it's there and it's funny looking, I call it a Gertrude. She's very famous. And so I'm going to make believe I see more green against that apple. Every painting problem can crop up as you paint apples. Every painting problem can crop up as you paint any subject. But apples are very patient people. You don't worry about them. And they're so colorful. They're a basic shape. Here is that beautiful red again. Then the red darkened before it turns into shadow. And then the complementary. That happens on all colors. If I were painting bananas, I'd be painting yellow, darkening the yellow, and then using violet, the complementary color to yellow, which is a mixture of red and blue. Now this one, white. Take a nice big gob of white and green, mix a lot to paint that bright, bright green that's right there. Watching the expensive end of the brush, that's that end. Can't see what's going on underneath, under here. So I make that stroke a little bit bigger and hack it off. Put the next stroke down. I call this a favorite lesson because we have a chance to study one thing, one shape, and repeat it. Becomes a nice looking picture, but the repetition is the lesson. We do it one and we think, gee, I think it's going pretty well, and so you employ what you've learned from one on the next one. Or you say, oh, that wasn't right, so you try another way. Paintings that are lessons, well, every painting is a lesson. You're trying to find out if you can do it, or how you're going to make it look. And red is a color that is one of the beauties in nature. Look at how much brighter, and yeah, I started this one, it was very dark. Now I've gotten lighter and much lighter in color, and so maybe I have to make these match this by putting some darks on this to make them look as though they all are from the same market. Or brighten this one. I think that looks better to brighten that one. Here's that dark alizarin crimson and Grumbacher red mixed. Here, this green is right along this edge. There's always a little green in this blossom end or stem end because the sun can't get in there and mature it, seems. Roscoe said, "Do you know why there are 5 lumps on an apple?" There are, delicious apples. You can see those 5 lumps very easily. And I don't know whether he made it up or not, but he said, "That's, why, Helen?" I said, "Why?" He said, "Because it comes from a 5-petaled flower." But you can see by the core that there are 5 things that come out that affect the outline. So he said, "You know why apples are fat on one side and thin on the other?" I said, "No." He says, "The fat side had the advantage of being on the outside of the tree." I said, "All that about an apple?" He says, "All that about anything you paint. Paint what you know, or apply what you know to what you see, to give your picture plausibility." That's violet, black, white, and alizarin crimson, a little yellow in it, because this off-white color is yellowish, and these are the cast shadows from the apples on the table. Now, I've seen this mistake happen. When I talk about the shadow being complementary to the color that it's on, or complementary to the object, some people actually make red apples cast green shadows. No, that's not true. The red is on the green is on the red, but the cast shadow is on the yellow, so it takes on the complementary of the yellow. I know this sounds all very confusing, but it's something that really has to be learned, just like any other art form. There are certain principles we have to accept. They don't inhibit us. Ooh, look what happened. I've got a dirty rag. They don't inhibit us. They just make us feel secure. We know more what it's all about, because our paintings do reflect on nature. They're our reflection on nature. I'm going to activate the color of the background always around the subject, not up there, to draw the eye to the focal area. Why don't I put this poor apple's bottom on? You might wonder about this can I keep dipping into. It's turpentine. I use it to clean my brush. I don't use it to really thin the paint. What it does is my brush is always wet from cleaning, and that makes it possible to spread the paint. You can't spread wet paint with a dry mop. You have to wet the mop to spread whatever you're, like the wax that you're going to put on a floor. Or don't you people ever have to wax a floor? So I don't worry too much about what I'm mixing with it when I do this. My major concern is cleaning the brush. And so the can is half filled with turpentine. So I can slosh that brush around vigorously to make sure that the brush is clean. The more fanciful painting mediums are for special effects. But you have to be familiar with paint to know about paint's special effects. You come to those conclusions. Becoming an expert at painting is an innocent evolution that comes from practice. I really do think you could rely more on your ingenuity in handling this stuff than in becoming encumbered with some complicated mixtures or instructions that sandwich you into always doing it the same way. What a happy picture this ends up to be. This poor apple looks a little puny. So we learned so much from painting apples. First of all, we're not that passionate about them. Not as passionate about apples as we are about painting people. So we are more apt to study, experiment, see what we can do about it. How can I have apples without having them shine? I don't know how many of you saw the picture I did of onions. They had highlights. Apples have highlights too. And remember, I put the highlights in opposite from the streakiness of onions. I'm putting the highlight in to make the apples look as though they go around, and now I can fluff them in opposite from the way I put them on. Nice, beautiful, big sable brush. It's nice and soft. If you don't fuse your highlights in and just put them in a big plops, they look like a chicken with a highlight foot walked across the canvas. So I've told you, let's see how this looks from a distance. So there are certain things that we learn, and one of the things that we learn about painting are their 5 tone values: a highlight, a body tone, a body shadow, a cast shadow, and a reflection. So let me put the reflection in. These 5 tone values are caused by light, and they influence every object that you'll paint, or they should, because this is what is going to make them look dimensional on a flat surface. Reflections very often are more nicely done when the painting is dry. Next week, I have an interesting lesson, and I call it "The 17th Century is the Founder of the Lost Line." I'm going to talk only about how you can manipulate these edges to give this mysterious feeling that you can see the back as well as the front. So please join me at Welcome to my studio, and I'll show you how I manipulate edges, or I'll teach you how to make soup.